nasty weather. Hey everyone, it's Classic DM, and we're going to continue our conversation that we started the other day about the cleric and positioning, and we're going to look in a little bit more detail about some of the things I suggested and let you take a look at how the rules as written are about spellcasting during melee. So what I want to do is show you what the basic, the AD&D rules say verbatim for spellcasting in melee, and we'll take a look at our fictitious layout here, and we'll talk about how those rules work in your game and what you can do to modify them if you want to, and if you don't want to modify them and you actually want to play rules as written, how can you still take advantage of the ideas that I was expressing yesterday about when you're playing a cleric. Just a quick little recap. If you haven't seen that previous video, it's called Cleric Positioning. One of the biggest strengths of the cleric in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is their high armor class. They're great, to hit rolls, which is the second best to hit rolls of all the classes, because all the to hit rolls are put into groupings, such as the thief and the assassin and things like that. So the cleric and the druid both have fantastic melee to hit rolls, and since the cleric's the most heavily armored, just as heavily armored as a fighter is in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Unlike other versions of the game, other versions of D&D or Pathfinder, what have you, my big advocacy is when you position yourself, in the front lines to help out with melee, knowing that you don't usually have enough spells to just lay back in the back and start casting heals all the time. Now, someone who's really hardcore and a real rules as written kind of person is going to go, that's terrible because all your spells will be interrupted. But it really kind of depends how you play things out. So let's talk about that particularly. One of the things about casting spells in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is a little bit different than other versions of the game, and you can tell as the evolution of AD&D changed is the amount of time. And the melee round in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is 1 minute melee round. So what they're trying to assume here, let's say we got this fighter, two-handed fighter, and our cleric is right toe to toe, and let's say this fire giant is going for her, right? Everyone else in the background is getting balled in the grand melee, what have you. So we've got our fighter focusing this fire giant, and we've got our cleric helping, bust a kneecap with his flail or what have you, and he's got his shield, and the fighter's trying to do as much damage as possible. The fighter is going to hit more consistently against the fire giant. There's nothing in the rules that says that the fighter can maintain the attention of the fire giant. So because of that, right, and because the fighter doesn't have any kind of special feats or any kind of abilities or any kind of snares or stuns or knockdowns or taunts or anything like that, they actually have no way to counter a very intelligent DM who decides that the moment this cleric starts to wind up maybe a cure serious wounds or cure critical wounds. In fact, let's just take a look at our pre-generated characters from the Hidden Shrine of Timoshan. So what does our girl got here? Mirror of the Disgrace. She's got, she only has like Cure Light Wounds memorized twice for her level 1 stuff. A high level, epic, over the top, crazy character used in our previous show. He's got heal. Level 6 spell heal is extremely powerful. This will almost heal all of your hit points but 1d4. And everyone knows that a 1d4 is the most worthless die in the whole game, right? So in this situation, that's a 4. So say he cast heal. Say this fighter only had, well, let's give you a specific example, right? Let's say that is, let's say it's Mercedes. So Mercedes got 132 hit points because maybe these are max level heroic characters. Say that she's fighting this fire giant. It's a fire giant lord or an epic character or hero or something. A Snur, right? Or whatever his name is. And she's gotten knocked all the way down to 10 health or something. And the cleric's like, I'm going to wind up a heal. Well, you got to look in the player's handbook and see what the casting time is for heal. Is it a verbal, somatic, or material component? This VSM thing is something you need to pay attention to in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's not something that a lot of DMs are going to pay close attention to. The reason why, I don't want to go off on a tangent. Let me get back to the discussion about this casting and combat. So there's nothing in the game that it says that the DM, when it's the time for the fire giant to attack, rather than attacking the fighter and finishing her, since she's bloodied, battered, her plate mail's all scratched, smashed up, she's got cleaves in her shoulder blades, she's literally just beaten to, she's like Nate Diaz except for Conor McGregor too, right? Really in bad shape, but not out yet. There's nothing that says the DM can't say, I'm going to turn my target and attack you because I know you're casting a spell. So that is a difficulty to have to deal with, and as a DM, I strongly encourage you to adjudicate playing the monsters with a level of intelligence that reflects what their real intelligence is. If you think about it, like how tactically smart is this fire giant really going to realize that the cleric's casting heal? The moment this fire giant hits the cleric, the heal spell, rules as written, is interrupted, lost forever. That is a terrible penalty for being hit for 1 damage, which could happen. Right? This could actually happen. So let's talk about how you can mitigate that, make that a little bit more fun. But before we even do that, let's take a look and see exactly how it's written in the book. So let me just pull up the player's handbook. If you got a player's handbook with you, flipped first, AD&D, get to player's handbook page 100 and a Dungeon Master's Guide too. Grab that. Go to page 65, and the page numbers are in the PDF versions too if you have those. So I'm just going to pull up the player's handbook first. So there's a section in the player's handbook that's called, I think it's on page 100. Here it is, spell casting. Now the first paragraph is talking about, casting during the course of adventure, and you can only cast so many spells per day, and it's kind of like a general rules, like how spells work and things like that. It doesn't really talk a lot about the verbal, somatic, and material components or any of that business or the spell duration. Let's go down that third paragraph here. Let's just highlight this if we can, because I know the highlighting tool in this PDFs are kind of clunky. Let's just take a look at this. Most spells can be cast during the course of a single melee round, although some, particularly high-level ones, require more time. Well, they're just talking about time. If you look to the left here, you see the spell Prismatic Wall, right, which is an illusionist spell. It says 1 turn per level. So if you're let's say you're Obscura casting that, right? Let's see, level 11 illusionist. That's 10 minutes. A turn is 10 minutes. 10 turns. 10 turns is an hour. So this is an hour and 10-minute long spell. That's the duration. Excuse me, I'm completely wrong. 7 segments. The segment is 6 seconds. So that's 42 seconds for her to cast that spell. And let's pull her up real quick so you can see who I'm talking about. So if you were to have Obscura cast a spell, that spell right there, Prismatic Wall, which she doesn't actually have memorized. Let's just say this is her in the back here, right? If she were to cast that spell, it takes a long time. So let's go back to the book here. So yes, that's true. We understand that. Some spells take longer to cast. You can't get the spell off in your turn in the melee round. You can wind it up the round before. Let's go take a look real quickly at our battlefield map here, and let's talk about that. Let's say that the cleric started casting a spell that took, more than a melee round to cast. So here's our fighter fighting the fire giant. Say there was a spell like Gate or something or whatever you're going to cast that costs more than a melee round. You start winding it up, and you actually lose your whole turn, but everyone else gets to go in all the initiative order, and then you get to deliver your spell the next time around. So it's kind of like winding up something and have it delivered. Makes sense, right? But here's where we get into the details about casting spells in melee, because this is kind of in melee range. Some of the other versions of the game, like 3.5, 4th edition, 5th edition, and Pathfinder 2nd edition, they have this weird philosophy which kind of bugs me. They provide a lot of detailed miniature-oriented rules for line of sight, and they do little diagrams that show you like what you can see and how close are you, and where's the attack of opportunity. But then they do these really strange rules like flanking that don't make any sense at all. They don't even pay attention to some of the facing directional rules that are in the DM's Guide in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So this is kind of where the rules is written versus what do you want to do to make sure your game is really kind of fun and feels cinematic and exciting for your players. They're really engaged in doing heroic things. You may want to mitigate that or change that around a little bit for yourself. But like I said, let's go back and look and see what it says as written about casting in melee. So our conversation is focusing on this cleric. He's trying to cast a spell and land a Cure Serious Wounds on our fighter right next to us on Mercedes, let's say. So in this paragraph, they use an example of a magic user about the casting over time. Magic user about to cast Fireball, getting struck by an arrow when in the midst of the spell, interrupts it. Sorry. Magical silence, obviously if you're silent, you can't cast anything if you get immobilized or damaged. So if you read that really, really careful, casting a spell requires certain actions, and if these are interrupted, the spell cannot be cast and is lost from memory. That is absolutely brutal. Completely brutal. That means you may have the most powerful high-level spell in the game memorized that's going to save the day that you waited to cast it when it really needs to be cast, and a kobold rolls a natural 20 and hits you for 1 damage, and your 100 health cleric or whatever no longer casts the spell and gets interrupted. To me personally, that's too extreme. Now I'm going to offer some suggestions how to make that less extreme, but we want to present the rules as written first, because remember, when Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules were written, they're coming from a miniature wargaming world. Everyone's playing miniature wargaming. The rules evolved from miniature wargaming. And in miniature wargaming, they have all kinds of things. Things like morale breaks and complete misses. And if you play Bolt Action or Hail Caesar or Squad Leader, units are being destroyed, being killed, being hit twice, and they're dead. They're being pinned. You have to roll to remove pin markers. So a lot of the tactical war games are about having battles with 10, 20, 30, 40, 60 units on the battlefield. They're expendable. In Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you're playing one character. It's not expendable character. It's supposed to be heroic. You're like Conan. You're like Phelan Grey Mouser. You're playing Drit Stewart and you're Elrica Melnibone. You're some heroic character for some fantasy novel or series that you love. You're playing the Warlord from Mike Grell, whatever. So there's rules in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that we always felt, even as little kids, when we're like 12 or 13, 14 years old, that we were like, that's not fun. That's literally what we were saying. That doesn't sound fun. Surely you're like really awesome cleric and you can cast while you're melee. You've been wearing plate mail and holding a shield and slinging a flail at the front lines your entire life. You know you have to cast spells and touch someone to heal them. Why would you not be able to pull that off just because someone tapped you for 1 damage? You know, hitting you for less than 1.2% of your total health. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent a little bit. Let's go back to that a little bit, this paragraph, right? So they're trying to describe to you casting spells and mailing this small little paragraph, and it's only in the player's handbook. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide does add a little bit more detail to that. And if you go to the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's only like page 65 or so. So let's get that back up again so you can see what we're talking about. We're going to go to page 65 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. So spell casting during melee, this is this whole left-hand side here. And it's going to kind of lay out a lot more rules on how to handle this kind of stuff as a DM. Let's just highlight all this stuff, how this all the way through here so you can see what we're talking about. So let's just look through this, okay? The functions are fully detailed player's handbook. Oh, not really. Determine who casts spells and what orders about initiative, etc., etc. Spellcasters will always insist that they're able to use their powers during combat melee. Let's just remove that. Let's just do this right here. So this kind of has an attitude, you know. There's nothing bad about it. It's just the way it's written. The DM must adjudicate the success of such use. Now that's where I picked the word up subconsciously. Consider this. The somatic movement portion of spells, which is like doing incantations with your hands, must begin and completed without interruption, a clean, smooth motion. Okay, that's like the manipulate action in Pathfinder. So say you start winding up a spell and someone comes up to take a swing at you. You're engaged in melee. You would need to defend yourself. And if anyone does that, you can't continue to cast the spell. I mean, if you're an amazing boxer or something like that, you might be able to do some upper body movement, head movement, but you're not going to be able to do the incantation still. So, but there's a lot of people in the real world who can do actions while dodging. So you have talking about heroic characters. Can heroic characters not grab the door and pull the door open while ducking down, while not being hit by an arrow? So that's kind of where it's like, if you're just a dork and you don't know how to fight and someone comes up and takes a whack at you with a two-handed weapon, you're casting a spell, it's going to interrupt you if it hits you. The spell as a whole must be continuous and uninterrupted from beginning to end. Okay, that kind of makes sense. You know, I'll whack you with I'm trying to stop you from casting a spell. It's not like an MMO where you're going to cast right through it. They did this in Dark Age of Camelot. They allow people to do quick casting once every now and then to get past that. Basically, that would mean that if you're a caster and you're trying to cast spells in the front line, like I was recommending you do, you would be useless. If the DM wants to create situations where there's a target change. So if the DM wants to make it where I start winding up a spell and he wants to change targets just to tap me once and interrupt me, every single time that happens, the DM could do that. The DM want to be a dork. If the DM really wanted that to happen, you could have the fighter get all the way down to 2 hit points, and the fire giant with this lust to killing humans, and especially this redheaded girl, can just run over and tap you and just, because he's probably going to hit you, run over and tap you and interrupt you. So you would even think, technically, that if the fire giant was to take a swing at me, I still need to defend by using my shield. So while casting spells, I even mention things like you don't get your dexterity bonus and stuff like that. So let's go back to this again. Once interrupted, for any reason whatsoever, let's get back open so you can see what I'm talking about. We're still in this highlighted yellow paragraph. The spells as a whole must be continuous uninterrupted from beginning to end. Once interrupted for any reason whatsoever, the spell is spoiled and lost, just as if you used it. That's too much. I think that's absolutely just way too much, right? You can play that on your own, how you want to do that. It takes a long time to memorize heal, right? a level 6 spell. It's extremely powerful. You have to pray to your deity for a long, long, long time to get it back. In fact, there's even a chart in the Dungeon Master's Guide that explains to you. I'm not going to pull that up here. It'll take too long to flip through it and find it. That tells you how long it gets to get that spell back. I think it's almost a day. So the whole lost forever thing, interrupting the spell is one thing. You didn't complete it, so how did it get used up? It's kind of odd. Spells cannot be cast while violently moving, such as running, dodging, a blow, or even walking normally. So in essence, if anyone takes a swing at you, and if they with a successful hit, be it a blow, missile, or appropriate spell that you don't save against, your spell is lost. That's very, 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 very brutal. So then you have to kind of think about this. Okay, all right, classic DM. So those are rules as written. You're not going to make us change all the rules to make it fun and overpower for the casters, are you? No, but here's the element of it that's kind of different. Let's get some of these other distractions out of the way so we can just focus on these guys here in the middle. Let's say here's your fire giant, and he's fighting this fighter, toe-to-toe. Fighter's getting damaged. You're a cleric. You're going to run up to try to heal, right? You come zipping up from the back. You're going to get in the back and try to cast a heal or cure serious wounds or cure light wounds to help save the day. Now, if you do that, what's to prevent the DM from saying that when this fire giant's round come, which his movement rate's probably 12 or something, what's to say the DM's going to say, oh, well, he's just going to take a step and take a swing at you and hit you and interrupt your spell. So, that's kind of tricky because the movement rates and how characters move and what they can do, it's not the 3-action economy like you have in Pathfinder. In fact, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, which is one thing about it, to be a weakness, fire giants have attack of opportunity. You could be a cleric in the back thinking about running up to cast a spell or trying to cast a spell to heal Eliphanisi, right, who's over here getting beat up by a bunch of orcs. Say a bunch of orcs are beating up Eliphanisi. Let's put her here, right? She's being beat up. You're thinking about running over and healing her. With the speed rules worth stride, strike, and all that kind of business, this fire giant could disengage from the fighter and move 25 feet and then 25 feet again and hit you and tap you once and prevent you from casting a spell and then run 25 feet back and come over here in one move, which is almost ludicrous. And if you try to do anything, if this fighter has attack of opportunity, sure, that's fine, but you're not going to drop the fire giant one hit. You're not going to prevent him from continuing his movement. So it's really, really kind of brutal. So in the first edition of AD&D, let's go back to our original example here. You've got the fighter fighting the fire giant, and you want to come up from behind and heal because oh, gee, I don't want to be hit. I don't want to be interrupted. If I get touched, I'm going to get interrupted. Well, the DM wants to be a real meanie about it and tactical. He can just go bink you once and he'll interrupt you anyway, and you're going to have to be close enough to pull up and stop and cast to get the spell off anyway. So in essence, it doesn't even matter if you try to do your positioning. If the DM wants to have these characters have some ability and take one step, a 5-foot step like in 3.5, can still take a swing at you with the reach on this massive two-handed sword. I mean, you're going to find that it's going to be really, really hard, especially against giants, to do anything about it. The same thing would happen when you're fighting a dragon. Same thing would happen when you're fighting an Etten. If you're fighting ogres, even if you were just fighting, let's say you were just fighting orcs, right? Let's get the big fire giant guy out of the way here. Let's say here's 2 orcs. Here's your fighter. Orc 1's attacking a fighter. Orc 2's attacking a fighter. In the background, you get Eliphanisi, a monk, taking on 2 fighters. And here you are, the cleric. This is you, right? And you're thinking about keeping your buddies alive. So your monk starts taking a lot of damage. So you say, I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to kind of make sure I go 1, 2, 3 and get behind by the fire and start casting a spell. There's nothing that says in the rules that the DM can't say, well, I'm just going to take a 5-foot step and bash you. In fact, there isn't even rules in AD&D for a 5-foot step. So the DM would already be kind of changing the tactical play of things to make it feel more realistic. Are the orcs smart enough to realize you're casting a spell? Yeah, absolutely. They're probably terrified of you and your glitzy armor and all your cool stuff. They're like, he's casting a spell, don't let it happen. So that makes a lot of sense. If you're reading the Drizzt Do'Urden novels, whether you like them or not, there's lots of situations where Drizzt is fighting and there's thousands of orcs and all this kind of stuff is attacking and he changes targets and does this. I mean, you see this even in the Lord of the Rings film, the cave troll changes targets and people. That's exciting. That kind of improvisational AI, the DM making things interesting, where these 2 orcs try to collapse on the fighter behind because the fighter's really wounded now and your chance to turn this way and you're hitting him from behind. You're going to try to get 5 over and stun. So these kinds of things I just discussed is what makes AD&D actually quite beautiful. Is there's basic rules, right? But you can mitigate them and make your personal rulings based on what you think is fair. So in this situation, do you think it's fair for a DM to say, I take a 5-foot step and swing at the cleric because the cleric's casting a spell? If it's his turn and he can get the spell off in one melee round, which is up to 60 seconds or 10 segments, right? Then the spell goes off, and there's no way to interrupt it. So in reality, let's look at a UFC fight. Tonight is Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone. Beautiful fight, respectful fighters, love it. 5 5-minute rounds, 25 minutes total. So in AD&D, that's 5 melee rounds, okay, per round. So it's a total of 25 melee rounds. If you play the game by the book without any kind of different compression of the time frame, here's what could happen. Cleric gets ready to cast, I don't know, Cure Serious Wounds on a monk, right? I start casting the spell. I complete the spell. I cast a spell. I heal the monk, touch the monk, and then it's his turn. He can't interrupt the spell casting. He can't preemptively leave his turn in the queue to come interrupt this. But in reality, this is supposed to be a whole minute going by. This is something that's in AD&D rules that's really kind of funky. I encourage you to change it to the 6 segment equals a round kind of vibe, because over the course of an entire minute, let's use UFC fighters for example. Over the course of an entire minute, this monk it's implying that you're dodging, you're parrying, you're jockeying for position, but you all end up where you started, and he's taking swings, you're parrying them, or you're moving your staff, or you're open hand tacking, grabbing the arm and twisting the arm, and no one's landed a successful hit yet, right? So when the roll of the dice actually happens at the end of the melee round, and the orc needs a 10 or higher to hit you, and he rolls 11, right? That means that after a full minute of all that fighting and parrying and reads and moving without a lot of movement, because the UFC octagon is as big as this area here, you finally get that chance to get your swing. You finally get to attack. So if your combat's going to be like that, which is almost like a war game, like playing Avalon Hill's Waterloo, okay, or where you had Division 1 fighting Division 2, or this battery of cannons is shooting this battery of cannons here, or this Panzer Division's fighting that Panzer Division, what I encourage you to do to make it more fun is take that existing melee round and compress it down to 6 seconds and allow impromptu actions like that to happen. So, going back to the original issue with the spell interrupt, let's go back to our Fire Giant example. So yesterday, we're talking about, here's your fighter by the campfire fighting this fire giant, and you're playing the cleric. And I'm telling you, listen, get in the front lines. You could take a hit. So I'm going to start casting a heal, Cure Serious Wounds. If this guy swings and hits you, here's one way to deal with it. One way. If I hit the cleric, right, I don't get an attack of opportunity because he's casting. There's no attack of opportunity in AD&D. In the first edition, if you want to call it first. So if it's my turn, you just had your turn, and that means you're taking a step back and recoiling, pulling that two-handed sword back, and you just took some damage, you're flinching, and the cleric goes, I'm going to wind up Cure Serious Wounds and land it on my fighter. I'd be able to do that entire action in this one melee round, and I get the spell off. Just because I'm casting a spell next to him doesn't mean that he has an opportunity to stop it from happening, right? So this is one thing that's kind of tricky. Let's go back to the rule book here, right? Let's just delete this highlight. So the way they have it written now, let's just go down here. Let's go here. We'll just highlight this too. Thus, in conclusion, a spell requires that a figure be relatively motionless and concentrate on effort during the entire course of uninterrupted casting. For example, magic user casting Fireball must be inside the intended area of the target, etc. The caster cannot begin a spell, interrupt it just prior to completion, run to a different area, then complete the spell. That's a really good example. Let's talk about that real quick. So what they're basically saying is, like, I can't start casting Cure Serious Wounds here and then go, I'm just going to take 1-2 steps and unload it. So it's not like Ultima Online where you can start winding up corpore and then just release it somewhere. I think there were spells that allowed you to do that, if I remember correctly. So what they want you to do is pull up, stop, wind up a spell, release the spell within your melee round. But there's no rules for preemptive. It's not Snapshot from Traveler. There's no rules for the DM to allow him to preemptively do something to stop you from casting, even though they mention that in the book. So it has this kind of like, I go, you go. You go, he goes. Monster goes, fighter goes, cleric goes. It's like Divinity: The Original Sin. If you ever played Divinity: The Original Sin 1 or 2, you realize the turn-based combat, or Final Fantasy VII, has this kind of funky little controlled vibe. So, you play Divinity: Original Sin, and suddenly there's like 3 enemies on screen. They at the top of the UI, it has all the enemies' little profiles are at the top, and then your turn, and then your turn, and then your turn, and your turn. There's no group initiative. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you have this big long string of 8 characters. Let's just add the cleric in there for good measure. 9 characters to get their turn. First he gets to go, then you get to go, then he gets to go, then you get to go, then you get to go, then he gets to go, and he gets to go, and you can't keep track of it. And someone dies, and then the whole order shifts, and everyone shifts over one. So all that kind of tracking of you go and stuff can be very, very tricky in Dungeons and Dragons. That's why I always suggest people use a group initiative. Let's go back to our casting example here. So you're the cleric. I'm telling you to get in the front, do frontline healing. How would you do this? How would you handle it? Why don't you try this as a rule, okay? If you are winding up a spell, and I'm going to trust to heal on this guy, and while I'm doing that, right, say it's a spell that can't be completed within my 6-second segment, and someone else comes up and takes a swing at you and damages you, you could actually make it where, like, it's just say it's a verbal somatic material component. The somatic is all the spell cut with your fingers. Verbal is just yelling stuff out. You can yell stuff out and never get interrupted. Material means you've got to hold something in your hand, like, I don't know, like a washer, right? And you got to hold the washer in your hand, rub your hand on like this thing, do some incantations, yell out woohoo, and then the spell goes off, right? So if the spell has a material or a somatic component, which just manual manipulate, that someone can hit you and interrupt it, but there's really no attack of opportunity. So is that ever really going to happen? So the way what I consider you could try doing is this. Let's say I start winding up a spell, and someone is over here right next to me within an adjacent square. Let's move him out of the way. Let's put some orcs on the screen. So it's going to look kind of funny because the camera's kind of at an angle here, so it may look like people are off the grid, but they trust me, they were actually on the grid. Okay, so let's say our cleric tries to wind up a spell here. In fact, we can use the overhead camera real quick. Let's just do that. We'll turn this one off. You can see this one. If you can see here, if you can see this area here, right? So with these adjacencies, who could possibly interrupt the cleric's casting? Well, he could, and he could. This guy's too far away. So if you want to put some kind of like adjacency attack of opportunity type of rule in your AD&D game, you could do that. Where the orc realizes that you're going to do something, but I wouldn't allow him to do that if he just went. If there's a series of turns where he gets to go first, he gets to go second, he gets to third, he gets to go fourth, fighter fifth, cleric sixth, right? So the fighter attacked this guy, wiped him out, and he's dead. Then this guy attacked, and the cleric's turn. The cleric gets to try to heal him. There's no one that's got a turn coming up that hasn't gone yet because he just went. So people that recently just went wouldn't get a chance to attack him. That's going to be very tricky for you to bookkeep that, okay? You may find it like, that's really hard. What you could say instead is that no matter what situation is the order, if I've got someone with adjacent within this 5-foot square around the character, that if you try to do some kind of a spell casting action or pull something out of your bag or unsheath a new weapon, I could make an attack towards you to try to stop you from doing it or slow you down from doing it. But I suggest you don't take the spell away. Let's do this specifically like this. Let's say you're playing the cleric, you're by yourself, right? And let's get you down here to a little closer view so it's more fun anyway. It's more like being actually in the action. We don't need to see this. Let's see this tabletop view. All right, here you are. You're a cleric. You're in the doorway. No one's flanking you. Orcs are coming to get you. Here's one guy in the back that you crush this freaking face in. So you're trying to do this fight here, right? And this guy attacked you, missed. This guy attacked you, missed. Your turn, you hit this guy, you damage him. This guy's here. You start casting a spell. Well, these two dudes are within range to like take a swing at you. So this is where I think that's a reasonable thing to have happen. It's kind of like attack of opportunity, like you're trying to do an action, and not necessarily like I'm trying to move past this guy and both of them get an attack of opportunity, but they have enough common sense to realize that you're trying to cast a spell and maybe try to interrupt you. If you allow them to hit, you have to say to yourself, well, okay, let's say this cleric let's use Mira the Disgraced. She's got what, 48 health? As a DM, you can say, listen, you're going to need to take at least 10% damage of your total health for it to interrupt your spell casting. In this case, that would be 10% of 48 hit points, which is about what? Let's get Mira up here so you can see what I'm talking about. So she's a 48 hit point girl, right? If he takes a swing and damages you, is it reached enough of a threshold to actually interrupt you spell casting? Because you got a shield in your hand, you got a flail in your hand. So you can say it's a 10% roll. Maybe it's a 20% roll. Maybe at lower levels it starts off at 20%. At higher levels it reduces down to 10%. It's really kind of up to you. And we're just making this up, right? We're just making this up to make this feel fun. We don't have a situation where all I can do is cast spells. I mean, God forbid you're an illusionist. You would never get anything off. So instead of doing the you go, I go, you go type infinite rotation, have enough dramatic sense to be like, I'm sorry, even though these guys attacked, you're trying to cast a spell in front of them. It's going to take you a full round to do it. You're not actively defending. They're able to move. Even though they just attack, they don't need 6 full seconds to recover and go, oh, I'm so tired. Let me just wait 6 seconds before I swing again. Allow them to take attack at you and say, hey, listen, if you can do over 10% threshold damage to these guys, to you, then I'll let that interrupt the spell, but I'm not going to take it away from you. You can try again the next round. That seems reasonable to me. I mean, it's a house rule, but it seems reasonable because I tell you what, if you, in this case, you'd have to do, let's just say 4.8, let's just say 5 damage. So let's say this orc here attacked. Say the 2 orcs attacked. Was a 1 as a flub. Here's a 4. Oh, let's get some higher numbers. Come on now. There's a 20 and a 16. So let's say that the orcs are using, I don't know, short swords, which are like 1 to 6, I think. So there's a natural 20. Let's say he did a natural 20. That's a 3 times 2, which is 6 damage. This guy, say he hit with a 16 and a 6. So this is 6. This is 6. Both of those are over the 10% threshold number I was just making up on the spot here, meaning that if she started to wind up bless or protection from evil, or what does she even have here that would even be useful to do? Whole person or command, or maybe she's trying to cast snake charm, or bless might be good. She might want to cast a bless to give herself a little more defensive capability, to be able to hit the orcs and kill them faster. They can actually interrupt her. Now, I don't have it memorized in my mind whether bless is VSM, what component it has. Just pretend it was a full VSM spell. So that kind of thinking you may find makes your gameplay more interesting. You don't scratch the spell off her list. She still has bless. She could try again the next melee round. Let's say in the next melee round, instead of attacking, she can try cast bless again, and both these guys get us attack. You may say, well, they just attacked you. They're not going to get a chance this time. So the first time they interrupted you, the second time you're aware they're trying to attack you. You have your shield up more. You start casting a spell defensively, and you can actually even block and defend yourself. But they're going to get a roll to hit anyway. And let's say one guy rolls a 1. And let's just make this number low. Say a 5. So they both miss you. They try to hit you. You can get the spell off. You got the bless spell off. Your fighter comes to your rescue, what have you. So those kind of things, this stuff is very controversial. If you play AD&D absolutely 100% by the book, you're going to probably find that's very, 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 very hard for clerics, druids, magic users, illusionists, thieves, and assassins, and even rangers to do really, really well. Because any DM that's been playing 5th edition, has been playing 4th edition, has been playing massive multiplayer games, has been playing Call of Duty, that's been playing mobile phone games or Black Desert, anyone's playing any other kind of game is going to have more savvy on how to control the enemies and know what they can do to attack you and stop you from doing it. You're actually going to be, the DM's ability to create dramatic combat is going to work against the old school rules that'll basically just shut you down. You won't be able to do anything. You're just going to be like, okay, I'm just getting the front line. I'm just going to cast spells or we're not doing anything. So with all that in mind, depending upon how your session's going to play, and you can ask your DMs like, hey man, let me ask you a question. I'm playing my cleric. I want to get my spells going, just out of character here. I want to get an idea. If I'm standing in front of 2 orcs and they're attacking me and they're trying to swing at me and I'm playing Mirror the Disgrace, will I be able to cast those spells and if I get damaged, will they automatically interrupt it and will I lose the spell forever? And that's a good chance for you to have your DM tell you what he thinks, because it is going to be their game. They're going to want to run it the way they want to run it. So ask them that question. And you can refer to them. Well, listen, in the Player's Handbook on page 100, it kind of describes it like, hey, once I get interrupted, I lose the spell forever, right? Let's just delete this here. Let's see. Here you go. Here you go, right here. So you say, listen, on page 100, it says if I get struck or damaged, I lose the spell and I can't cast it. And you can say on the Dungeon Master's Guide, if I get hit like casting Fireball, I've lost the spell, it's gone. So how do you want to rule that in our game? Because it's going to affect how I play my caster, or, as I said yesterday, playing your cleric. So if you've got a DM that's like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a saving throw versus breath weapon. If you make your save versus breath weapon, you can actually completely avoid the melee attack, and you can continue casting a spell. Or you can say, well, no, I'm sticking to rules as written. I'm old school, and I don't want anything changed. The rules are balanced the way they are. TSR, multi-geniuses. Let's just leave it like that. You're like, okay, all right. So if you're going to play a cleric in a situation with someone absolutely rules as written, you're probably going to want to memorize spells and cast them in the back, like Bless and stuff like that, when this is happening ahead of time, buffs, and then adventure-oriented spells like Augury and Detect Evil and No Alignment and all those kinds of fun spells. You're not going to want to cast spells that are going to be used in combat. And that's, today I didn't want to do this. I told myself I wouldn't do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let's go through thematic ideas for what you would memorize based on what your GM says to you. All right? If you just go back to our example here real quick. Let's say, as written, you have a DM that says, if you're standing here and these orcs are trying to get you, right? That if you get touched or damaged for 1 point or higher, any spell casting is interrupted. So you know then that you don't want to do this kind of positioning like I was talking about yesterday. And especially if you find your DM, you need to pay attention to how he plays it to or her. Do they start having guys switching targets? Do they start slipping in a little attack of opportunity in your game session? How do they handle these clustered up, close, Braveheart frontline melee engagements? Most people are going to try to want this to feel like a movie. They're going to want it to feel really exciting, like people really close and fighting, like the knife fight in the top of the building and Saving Private Ryan. They're going to want to have that kind of stuff happening. Sorry about bumping the camera there. Ask your DM ahead of time before you get yourself into a bad situation where it feels like crap. How they want to mitigate, how they want to rule this kind of scenario. It's like the Diablo doorway thing. Can these guys both interrupt me? If we lost initiative and he gets to go first and he gets to go second, he gets to go third, this is fourth, this is fifth, he attacks her, that's fine. We'll just consider them not even being in and he attacks me, he's done attacking me. I start winding up a spell. He's not close enough to hit me. He can't hit me. He already went. I can complete the spell and I can cast Bless. If that's how it is, then you need to plan it appropriately. Ask your DM, how do you like to rule disengaging? Like, these guys rush up, they come around the corner, they're in front of you, you roll for initiative. When it's your turn, can you take a 5-foot step back like this? Can you take a step like this? Do they get to follow you automatically? How does that work? Because that affects your tactical decision making, what you're going to do as a cleric or caster or anything else. I think you need to be in the front lines using your great melee to hit damage and your great melee to hit numbers, your relatively okay melee damage depending on amazing of a weapon you have, your great armor class, your ability to cast heals requires you to touch your teammate anyway, frontline warrior priest type thinking, right? So ask your DM about these kinds of situations, and based upon what answer they give you, change your plan for how you're going to play your cleric to match the play style of the DM and the game session, so it's not going to be a conflict. Because there is no wrong way to play it. Let's say that I was playing a cleric with you. You and I are playing together. You're playing this two-handed paladin or something, or a two-handed warrior. I'm playing this bulky, full-plate, girl cleric or something. And we're going to go on some adventure like Keep on the Borderlands or the first level in the moat house and the village of Hamlet. And we're going to play. He's going to make me say that, like, these guys, if you start casting a spell in front of these guys, they're going to hit you. But if it's your turn, they can't do anything. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So you might be like, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the kind of cleric that goes up in the front lines and starts meleeing and fighting, because my DM will allow me to disengage from the fight when it's my turn and move my max movement rate, which I usually think should be 15 or 20. And then when it's their turn, does the DM have the enemies chase me? Like, okay, so he wants to keep them stuck on me. So I'm going to need to fight this guy to the death. But then again, I'm not able to heal my fighter friend. So think about how to play when you've got a DM that's going to have the AI of the enemies act advanced and super smart. So let's say you have a DM that does that. You try to disengage from the combat, and he has the orc follow you on the orc's next round, and the orc takes a swing at you. Or let's say you have a DM that says the moment you try casting a spell, you get interrupted. So what do you want to do in that situation? Okay, maybe you're the type of cleric that does sit in the back, right? And you allow other classes to choke the doorway, and you tactically get in the back, and you tactically step forward, and you tactically heal without blocking everyone in. You do things like, I'm just going to stand here so I can reach over and heal you, and when I'm done doing that, I'll say, let's get over here and let's do a swap. You're taking damage. I'll slip in here and you'll slip in here. I'll start taking some damage while you're back over here because you're really wounded. So start thinking about every single piece on the checkerboard. It's going to make a difference. Another thing you could do is say, well, listen, I'm going to get in the front lines of melee because I'm not going to die. Me and the fighter are probably going to live just as good as everyone else, but I'm going to choose spells that are going to be extremely useful as a cleric that can't cast while fighting. All right? So let's look at these spells real quick, and then we'll wrap this up in less than 5 minutes. Let's say you have to play with a DM, not against him, but with a DM that's very by the book, right? You need to look at the spells in the spell table, page 40 of Player's Handbook, and think, which one of these spells is going to be useful to us during the adventure that I don't have to actually cast during combat? And things like Cure Light Wounds, I'll only use that when we're not in a fight. So things like, Bless and Command can be done during combat if you're far enough away. Bless, great buff, right? Create Water, not really that useful. Cure Light Wounds, it doesn't really heal for very much. Detect Evil, Detect Magic. Detect Magic is super useful in downtime. Light, someone can have a torch. Protection from evil, yeah, it's another buff. You could do bless and protection from evil, and then from the back of the fight, and then start marching forward and doing your melee. So that may be the way you want to approach it. Let's take a look and see what that would be like. Let's say you did the situation where here's the fighter, orcs come rushing up the stairs. They get ready to, both of them are attacking the fighter. Another orc's in the back. You cast protection from evil and bless in your 2 turns. Then maybe one orc starts taking a step forward, and then you take a step forward and you clog the doorway, and then you just melee the rest of the time. And you blew 2 spells, and it's going to take you 4 hours to get those spells back anyway. So that might be one way to consider how to play. And they do this a lot in Baldur's Gate. If you ever played the Baldur's Gate or the Icewind Dale, Baldur's Gate 2 or Icewind Dale 2, or those kind of games, or even some of the more modern versions of like Neverwinter Nights, a lot of the AI of the enemies, and when you have companions in your group and you're not controlling them, that's what they'll do. Your cleric will be on like, oh, just cast buffs and then run in the fight. So you could do it that way. You want to pick spells that are going to make a difference. Things like remove fear, resist cold, they're not really going to make much of a difference. And Sanctuary is kind of quirky. Augury, and that's like a Tomb of Horrors kind of spell. Some people love it. There's a comment from one of the people watch one of his. She never cast Augury. It just depends. If that's the way you play in adventures where that happens a lot, it's going to be useful. Detect, charm, find traps, hold person, no alignment. Those are all pretty good. We mentioned some of these things before, but things like Spiritual Hammer, you're better off just going up in the front line and crushing someone with your flail. I mean, to tell you the truth, you're probably going to live just as long as a fighter in the front line with a shield and a flail in your hand, or a mace, or a warhammer, than a fighter is going to do with a 2-handed weapon. 3rd level, animate dead, continual light, cure blindness, cure disease, all the cures. That's because in AD&D, there's so many of these nasty things, a lot of undead that do things to you, like cause diseases and cause blindness. Things like locate object. Almost every single TSR module ever made always has something really awesome that's hidden in a room, but you don't have enough time to spend a whole afternoon in the hidden shrine of Tomoeshan in the crab room trying to find some magical key or find the wish ring in the Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl. You'd be so annoying if every time you come in the room that you want to cast locate object. It's just really annoying. Prayer is really strong. Remove curse is okay. Speak with dead. Wow. Talk about a really interesting thing you could use. I mean, you could do speak with dead to find out what happened in the battle, all that kind of stuff. Cure serious wounds, 4th level. It's the first time you get a decent heal. You're not really a healer, You're more this utilitarian, holy fighter, to tell you the truth. You're kind of like a paladin, to tell you the truth. I mean, you really are just basically a paladin, but you have all these protection-oriented spells. There's not really any strong spells until you get to 5th. When 5th, you start seeing the nasty stuff. Things like Flame Strike and Insect Plague. Those are really nasty. Raise Dead and Quest. I mean, those are incredibly powerful spells. So until you get to a campaign where you're 5th level or higher, I think your role really needs to be buffer, frontline fighter, and you don't necessarily need to be in the front lines to cast heals in the fight if someone's going to play if your DM is a rules as written guy. You can be, or girl, you can be one of these clerics is like, well, listen, we got 2 fighters in our party. Where's Varenjar at? He's around here somewhere, isn't he? Where did he go? I don't see him. Let's just use Elephanisi here. In fact, we'll just use this dude here. So if you got to fight a situation where you got 2 frontline fighters and you're the cleric, you're casting some buffs, stay in the back, make sure there's choke points. If you're doing this in the open field, just pay attention to how your DM handles the combat. Is the DM going to have a situation? Let's put these 2 dudes here. Let's say orc attacking you, orc on him, dead orc in the back. More orcs coming. Here's the cleric. Here's the monk. Here's your magic user illusionist trying to get a line of sight, trying to figure out where to cast a spell. This is the traditional old school way of playing. Back lines, front lines, back lines, front lines. That's the situation where it's going to be, but if your DM's not doing a lot of like, oh, you start casting a spell and I take 2 steps and interrupt you, then you can do things like stay right here, 1 line back, 1 5-foot grid back, and cast spells on someone because you have to touch them. And you can do that till you run out of spells, or save that to late in the fight. Do a situation where you can fight, things go bad, I take a step back, waste a melee round, then I cast a heal. But those heals, they're just not very strong. Until you get heal, you're not going to save anyone's life. If you really are not going to save it, you're not really a healer. You really don't have good heals. None of the spells in AD&D are good heal spells except for the spell heal. Heal is just so overpowered, it's ridiculous. Cure critical wounds. By the time you get to it, people have so much health, it's just ridiculous. Anyways, it's kind of a long video, but I want to talk about this stuff because it's important to the advice I gave in the previous video about positioning. You really are kind of a frontline melee fighter, helping your fighter. You're going to need to adjust your playstyle, your spell memorization list based on how your DM plays the enemies, how well he does the AI, How does he handle one step? How does he handle disengaging? Does he have his own attack of opportunity thrown in there? And how does he handle spell interrupts? So take a look at the Player's Handbook, page 100. Take a look at the DM's Guide, page 65. Learn those rules. Ask the DM how he wants to run it. It's his game. Let him do it however he wants. Ask him up front about some of these rules. How do you handle this? How do you handle this? How do you prefer this to happen? Will I be able to cast spells while someone's trying to hit me? So you might DM like, you can't have a dex bonus and you can't use your shield. That's okay. It just means you can be a little bit easier to hit, but you can still get the spell off. Ask him about time. Are we going to use a traditional 1 minute melee round? Are you going to use a 6-second melee round like in 5th edition or Pathfinder? Ask those kind of questions. Not to be annoying, not to be a weenie, an unpainted weenie. Is so you understand, because it's going to affect tactically what you do on the board, to have fun, make dramatic moments, build memories with your friends, and play again the next weekend. All right, cool. We'll leave it at that. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.